Death is not the extinguishing of the light, but the putting out of the lamp, because the dawn has come. Imagine discovering an ancient manuscript that completely shatters everything you believe about death. A text so powerful, so revolutionary, that for over 1,000 years it was kept hidden from ordinary people, reserved only for those whose minds were prepared to grasp its profound truth. This manuscript is the Tibetan Book of the Dead, an extraordinary text that reveals something modern science is only beginning to understand. You will never actually die. What we call death is merely a transition, a doorway into another state of consciousness. And what happens in the first 49 days after your final breath determines everything about what comes next. The Tibetan Book of the Dead serves as a precise roadmap of the afterlife journey, detailing every stage, every vision, every test the consciousness faces after the body ceases to function. It reveals that the moment of death is not an ending, but rather the beginning of the most important test you will ever face. Most souls fail this test, not because they are unworthy, but because they are utterly unprepared. They do not recognize what is happening. They cannot distinguish between reality and illusion. They do not understand that everything they experience after death, every sound, every vision, every sensation, is a projection of their own mind. The manuscript describes a realm called the Bardo, the intermediate state between death and rebirth. In this realm, consciousness exists without a physical body, moving through a series of stages over exactly 49 days. During this time, the soul faces incredible visions, both beautiful and terrifying, all designed to test its awareness, its ability to recognize truth from illusion. The most astonishing revelation is that the first moments after death offer an immediate opportunity for complete liberation. The instant the body dies, consciousness encounters what the text calls the clear light of reality, a radiant, overwhelming luminosity that contains the ultimate truth of existence. If the soul can recognize this light for what it truly is and merge with it completely, it achieves instant enlightenment, breaking free from the cycle of rebirth forever. But almost no one recognizes this opportunity. Instead, most souls recoil from the light, clinging to their identity, their memories, their unfinished desires. And in that moment of fear and attachment, they miss their chance at liberation, descending deeper into the bardo, where the illusions become increasingly complex and difficult to navigate. What makes this manuscript so forbidden, so dangerous to established power structures, is its fundamental challenge to conventional religious teachings about the afterlife. There is no external judgment, no divine courtroom weighing your sins against your virtues. The only judge is your own consciousness, reflecting back every thought, every action, every intention you carried in life. The ancient masters who preserved these teachings understood something profound. The state of your mind at the moment of death determines everything that follows. Those who die in fear experience terror in the afterlife. Those who die clinging to attachments are pulled back into reincarnation. Only those who die with awareness, who have prepared themselves through meditation and spiritual practice, have any chance of recognizing the illusions of the bardo. What if you could know exactly what awaits you after death? What if you could prepare for it now, while you still have time? The journey through the 49 days of the bardo is about to begin. And what happens next will challenge everything you thought you knew about the greatest mystery of human existence. But first, we must understand what happens in the crucial first moments after the heart stops beating. When consciousness separates from the physical body and encounters something both terrifying and sublime. The transition happens in an instant. One moment, you are aware of your body, the weight of it, the sensation of your final breath leaving your lungs. The next moment, something profound shifts. You still exist, but differently. There is no more heartbeat, no more breathing, yet awareness continues. According to the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the first experience after death is a sensation of weightlessness, of expanding beyond the confines of the physical form. Many who have had near-death experiences describe this as floating above their body, watching as doctors work frantically to revive them, feeling strangely detached from the scene below. But this is merely the beginning. What comes next is far more extraordinary. Within moments of death, consciousness encounters what the ancient text calls the primordial clear light of pure reality. This is not a metaphor or a poetic description. It is a direct experience of ultimate truth, a blinding, overwhelming radiance that contains within it the fundamental nature of existence. This moment represents the first and greatest opportunity for liberation. If the consciousness can recognize this light as the true nature of reality, as the ground of being from which all phenomena arise, it can merge with it completely. In that merging, the cycle of rebirth ends. The soul transcends the wheel of samsara, achieving what Buddhists call enlightenment, freedom from the endless cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. But recognizing the clear light requires extraordinary spiritual preparation. The consciousness must be able to surrender completely, to release all attachment to identity, to memories, to desires. It must recognize that what appears as an external light is actually its own true nature being reflected back. For the unprepared, which includes nearly everyone, this moment passes unrecognized. Instead of surrendering to the light, the consciousness recoils from it. Confusion arises, fear takes hold. The mind, conditioned by a lifetime of identifying with a separate self, cannot comprehend the dissolution of boundaries that the clear light represents. As the opportunity for immediate liberation fades, the consciousness begins to experience the second phase of the bardo. Sounds emerge, subtle at first, then increasingly intense. The Tibetan text describes these as sounds like 1,000 thunders, reverberating through the consciousness. These are not external sounds, but the mind's own energies being experienced without the filtering mechanism of the physical senses. Following the sounds, visions begin to appear. The first visions are of peaceful, radiant deities, manifestations of wisdom and compassion that emanate a profound sense of benevolence. These beings appear as embodiments of pure light, their forms both distinct and fluid, radiating colors more vibrant than anything experienced in physical life. These peaceful deities are not external entities judging the soul. They are projections of the consciousness itself, reflections of its own highest potential. If the soul can recognize them as aspects of its own mind, another opportunity for liberation presents itself. By merging with these peaceful manifestations, the consciousness can still transcend the cycle of rebirth. But again, recognition requires awareness. Without preparation, without the training to see beyond appearances, the soul perceives these visions as separate from itself. It either reaches toward them in desire or turns away in fear. Either reaction keeps the consciousness bound to the cycle, unable to recognize the true nature of what it is experiencing. As the days in the bardo progress, the visions become increasingly intense. The peaceful deities begin to transform, their radiant forms shifting into wrathful manifestations, terrifying, multi-headed, multi-armed figures that appear to threaten the soul with destruction. These wrathful deities are not demons or punishments. They are the same energies as the peaceful deities, only appearing in different form. They represent the consciousness's own wisdom energies, now appearing in guise designed to cut through delusion. But to the unprepared soul, They appear as external threats, triggering profound terror. The Tibetan Book of the Dead emphasizes repeatedly that nothing in the bardo is external to the consciousness experiencing it. Every vision, every sound, every sensation is a projection of the mind itself. The peaceful and wrathful deities, the lights and sounds, the sensations of bliss or terror, all are reflections of the soul's own nature. This is the profound truth that makes these teachings so revolutionary. There is no external judgment in the afterlife. There is only the mind encountering itself in its purest form, free from the limitations of physical existence. What happens next in the bardo journey will determine whether the soul moves toward liberation or falls back into the cycle of rebirth. But before we explore that, we must understand why this knowledge was kept hidden for centuries, and why even today, most people will live their entire lives without ever preparing for the most important journey they will ever take. By the second week in the bardo, the soul has already missed its first opportunities for liberation. The clear light has faded. The peaceful and wrathful deities have appeared and dissolved. Now, the journey through the intermediate state deepens, and the experiences become even more intense. The Tibetan Book of the Dead describes the bardo as lasting exactly 49 days, divided into several distinct phases. During this time, consciousness exists in a realm where thought instantly manifests as reality, where time flows differently than in physical existence, and where the boundaries between self and other become increasingly fluid. Without a physical body to ground it, consciousness in the bardo experiences reality directly through perception alone. There is no separation between the perceiver and the perceived. What the soul thinks, it experiences as real. What it fears, it encounters. What it desires, it is drawn toward. This is why the state of mind at death is so crucial. A consciousness filled with fear will experience the bardo as terrifying. A mind clouded by attachment will be constantly pulled toward illusions that reflect its desires. Only a mind trained in awareness can navigate this realm with any hope of liberation. By the third week, most souls have become completely lost in the illusions of the bardo. They no longer remember that they have died. They believe the visions they encounter are external realities rather than projections of their own mind. They react to these projections with the same patterns of attraction and aversion that characterize their behavior in life. This is where the journey becomes even more challenging. The Tibetan text describes how the soul now begins to experience what modern near-death researchers call the life review, a comprehensive replay of the life just lived, experienced not just from one's own perspective, but from the perspective of everyone affected by one's actions. Every act of kindness, every moment of compassion is experienced as waves of bliss. Every harmful action, every moment of cruelty or indifference is felt as suffering. There is no judgment from above, no external deity weighing good against evil. There is only the soul experiencing the full impact of its own actions, feeling precisely what it caused others to feel. For those who lived with awareness and compassion, this review becomes a source of peace and clarity. For those who caused harm or lived unconsciously, it becomes an overwhelming torrent of regret and pain. Not as punishment, but as truth, the unavoidable reality of one's own actions, reflected back with perfect clarity. As the life review unfolds, the soul begins to be drawn toward its next rebirth. The Tibetan Book of the Dead describes how karmic seeds planted during the previous life begin to ripen, creating subtle attractions toward particular realms of existence. These attractions are not imposed from outside, but arise from within the consciousness itself, from the patterns and tendencies it cultivated while alive. By the fifth week in the bardo, these karmic attractions become increasingly powerful. The soul begins to experience visions of its potential future lives, glimpses of the various realms it might be reborn into based on its karma. These realms include not just human existence, but the full spectrum of possible states, from the most blissful to the most tormented. What determines which realm the soul is drawn toward? According to the Tibetan teachings, it is not divine judgment, but the soul's own mental state. Consciousness naturally gravitates toward the realm that resonates with its predominant tendencies. A mind dominated by anger is drawn toward realms of suffering. A mind characterized by desire is pulled toward realms of temporary pleasure but ultimate frustration. Only a mind that has cultivated wisdom and compassion is drawn toward circumstances conducive to spiritual awakening. As the 49 days progress, these attractions become increasingly difficult to resist. The soul, unless it has achieved liberation through recognizing the true nature of the Bardo visions, will eventually be swept into one of these realms, drawn by the magnetic pull of its own karma. In the final days of the Bardo, the consciousness begins to experience signs of its impending rebirth. It sees visions of couples engaged in union, representing potential parents. It feels itself drawn toward particular situations, particular circumstances that resonate with its karmic patterns. For most souls, this process happens unconsciously. Pulled by attraction or pushed by aversion, the consciousness drifts toward its next incarnation without awareness or choice. In the moment of conception, it enters the womb, forgetting everything about its previous existence and its journey through the Bardo. This is the cycle that has repeated countless times for each consciousness. Birth, life, death, Bardo, rebirth. An endless wheel of becoming, driven by ignorance and perpetuated by unconscious reactions to the illusions of existence. But the Tibetan Book of the Dead insists that this cycle is not inevitable. At every stage of the Bardo journey, opportunities for liberation exist. Even in the final moments before rebirth, if the soul can awaken to the true nature of what is happening, it can still break free. The key is awareness, the ability to recognize illusion as illusion, to see that everything experienced in the Bardo is a projection of mind rather than external reality. This awareness cannot be developed after death. It must be cultivated during life, through meditation, through spiritual practice, through the systematic training of consciousness. What happens during the 49 days of the Bardo is not random. It follows a precise pattern, a pattern that the ancient masters mapped with extraordinary detail. But knowing this pattern is useless unless one has prepared the mind to recognize it when it appears. And this brings us to the most profound question of all. If the Bardo is real, if these ancient teachings accurately describe what happens after death, why were they kept hidden for so long? Why were they reserved only for initiates, concealed from the general population for over 1,000 years? As the Bardo journey continues, the visions experienced by the consciousness become increasingly personalized, reflecting the specific karmic patterns developed during life. What began as universal archetypes, the clear light, the peaceful and wrathful deities, now transforms into manifestations uniquely tailored to the individual soul. By the 4th week in the Bardo, most souls have become completely immersed in these personalized visions. The Tibetan Book of the Dead describes this phase as particularly dangerous because the illusions now appear in forms specifically designed to trigger the soul's deepest attachments and aversions. For someone who lived with strong religious devotion, the visions might appear as divine figures from their tradition, angels, saints, or enlightened beings extending hands of blessing. For someone dominated by fear, the same energies might manifest as demons, judges, or terrifying entities threatening punishment. These visions are neither rewards nor punishments. They are reflections of the soul's own consciousness, its beliefs, fears, and attachments projected outward and experienced as external reality. The peaceful visions are not heaven, and the terrifying ones are not hell. They are the same fundamental energies experienced differently depending on the state of the perceiving mind. This is why the Tibetan tradition emphasizes that heaven and hell are not places, but states of consciousness. In the Bardo, this becomes literally true. The mind creates its own experience, its own reality, based on the seeds planted during life. For those who cultivated awareness through meditation and spiritual practice, these visions are recognized as projections. The trained mind sees through the appearances to their empty nature, understanding that even the most terrifying manifestation is ultimately insubstantial, like a reflection in a mirror or an image in a dream. But for the untrained mind, which includes nearly everyone who has not specifically prepared for this journey, the visions are experienced as absolutely real. The soul reacts to them with the same patterns of attraction and aversion that characterized its behavior in life, strengthening the very karmic tendencies that keep it bound to the cycle of rebirth. By the 5th week, these karmic patterns begin to solidify, creating stronger and stronger pulls toward particular realms of existence. The Tibetan text describes how the soul begins to experience winds or currents, drawing it toward its next birth. These are not physical winds, but currents of karmic energy, the accumulated momentum of habitual tendencies developed over countless lifetimes. It is at this stage that the soul begins to experience visions of the 6 realms of existence described in Buddhist cosmology. These realms represent the full spectrum of possible states of consciousness, from the most blissful to the most tormented. The God realms appear as visions of extraordinary beauty and pleasure, worlds of light where all desires are instantly fulfilled. The human realm appears as balanced, containing both pleasure and pain in equal measure. The animal realm appears as visions of forests or wilderness. The hungry ghost realm manifests as barren deserts where nothing satisfies. The hell realms appear as visions of intense suffering and torment. Again, these are not physical locations but states of consciousness, ways of experiencing existence. The soul is drawn toward the realm that resonates with its predominant mental patterns. A mind dominated by desire is pulled toward realms of temporary pleasure. A mind characterized by aggression gravitates toward realms of conflict. A mind trained in wisdom and compassion is drawn toward circumstances conducive to spiritual development. As these visions unfold, the life review continues in greater depth. The soul now experiences not just the effects of its actions in the most recent life, but the accumulated karma of many lifetimes. Patterns become visible. The soul sees how the same tendencies, the same reactions have played out again and again across multiple incarnations. For those with spiritual training, this recognition can lead to profound insight. Seeing the patterns clearly, understanding their empty nature, the soul can choose to release them rather than continuing to be driven by them. This release is not achieved through will or effort, but through clear seeing, through the recognition that these patterns have no inherent existence apart from the mind that perceives them. But for most, this recognition never comes. Instead, the patterns strengthen, the karmic winds grow more powerful, and the soul is drawn inexorably toward its next rebirth. By the 6th week in the Bardo, the visions begin to include specific glimpses of potential future lives. The soul sees flashes of different environments, different circumstances, different bodies it might inhabit. These glimpses are not random, but reflect the karmic seeds ripening within the consciousness. The Tibetan Book of the Dead offers specific instructions for this phase of the journey. It advises the soul to resist being drawn toward pleasant visions, to avoid being repelled by frightening ones, and to maintain awareness of the illusory nature of all appearances. It provides specific visualizations and mantras designed to help the consciousness recognize its true nature, even in the midst of these compelling visions. But these instructions are useful only if the soul remembers them, only if it has trained in them during life. For the unprepared, the visions are simply overwhelming, and the pull toward rebirth becomes nearly impossible to resist. As the 49 days draw to a close, the soul faces its final test. The visions of potential births become more vivid, more compelling. The karmic winds grow stronger. The consciousness, unless it has achieved liberation through recognition, will be swept into one of these visions, drawn by attraction or pushed by aversion into its next incarnation. This is why the ancient masters considered preparation for death the most important spiritual practice of all. They understood that the journey through the bardo is not just about what happens after death, but about the culmination of an entire life. Every thought, every action, every habit developed during life creates the conditions that will determine the bardo experience and the nature of the next rebirth. But if this knowledge is so crucial, why was it kept hidden for centuries? Why were these teachings reserved only for initiates, concealed from the general population? The answer reveals something profound about the nature of spiritual truth and the systems designed to control it. By the 7th week in the bardo, as the 49-day journey nears its completion, the soul encounters what may be the most profound experience of all: the complete karmic reckoning. This is not judgment from an external deity, but the soul's own consciousness fully confronting the truth of its existence across many lifetimes. The Tibetan Book of the Dead describes this phase in vivid detail. The soul now stands before what appears to be a great mirror. A mirror that reflects not just its physical form, but the entirety of its being. Every thought, every intention, every action from countless lives. In this mirror, nothing can be hidden. There are no excuses, no justifications, no ways to avoid seeing the complete truth of one's existence. The soul experiences not just what it did, but why it did it. Not just the external actions, but the internal motivations behind them. For those who lived with awareness and compassion, this mirror reflects radiance. They see how their actions created ripples of positive energy, how their kindness affected others in ways they never fully understood while alive. They experience the full fruition of the good they brought into the world. But for those who lived unconsciously, who caused harm through ignorance or intention, the mirror reflects darkness. They experience the full impact of their negative actions, feeling precisely what they caused others to feel. This is not punishment, but truth, the unavoidable reality of cause and effect, playing out with perfect clarity. What makes this experience so profound is that it occurs beyond the distortions of ego. In physical life, the ego constantly filters reality, justifying harmful actions, minimizing responsibility, and maintaining a positive self-image, even in the face of contrary evidence. But in the bardo, these filters are gone. The soul sees itself with absolute clarity, with no possibility of self-deception. This is why the life review is often described as more intense than any heaven or hell imagined by religious traditions. It is the experience of complete truth about oneself, with nothing hidden and nowhere to hide. As this review unfolds, the soul also encounters what appears to be a judgment scene. The Tibetan text describes how the soul perceives itself standing before the Lord of Death, who weighs its good and evil deeds on a great scale. White pebbles representing positive actions are placed on one side, black pebbles representing negative actions on the other. But this scene, like everything in the bardo, is not what it appears to be. The Lord of Death is not an external judge, but a projection of the soul's own wisdom mind. The weighing of deeds is not an external judgment, but the soul's own consciousness, evaluating the patterns it has created through its choices. This is the revolutionary insight at the heart of the Tibetan Book of the Dead. There is no external judgment in the afterlife. There is only the mind encountering itself in its purest form, experiencing the full consequences of its own actions with perfect clarity. For most souls, this reckoning is overwhelming. Faced with the complete truth of their existence, they instinctively seek escape. They turn away from the mirror, away from the judgment scene, toward the visions of rebirth that now appear increasingly attractive. These visions have been present throughout the Bardo journey, but now they intensify. The soul sees what appear to be doorways or gateways, each leading to a different realm of existence. Some appear beautiful and inviting, filled with light. Others appear dark and threatening. Each represents a possible rebirth, a potential next chapter in the soul's ongoing journey. What determines which doorway the soul is drawn toward? According to the Tibetan teachings, it is not divine decree, but the soul's own karmic patterns. Consciousness naturally gravitates toward the realm that resonates with its predominant tendencies. The doorways themselves are neither rewards nor punishments, but opportunities for the soul to continue its evolution through the particular circumstances that match its current state of development. As the 49th day approaches, these doorways become increasingly compelling. The soul feels itself drawn toward one or another, pulled by subtle attractions or pushed by aversions. For most, this process happens unconsciously. The soul drifts toward its next incarnation without awareness or choice, like a leaf carried on a stream. But even at this late stage, liberation remains possible. The Tibetan Book of the Dead offers specific instructions for this final phase of the journey. It advises the soul to recognize the doorways as projections of mind, to resist being drawn toward even the most attractive realms, and to maintain awareness of the empty nature of all appearances. For the soul that can maintain this awareness, that can see through the illusions even as they become increasingly compelling, there is still the possibility of breaking free from the cycle altogether. By recognizing that all the realms of existence are ultimately projections of mind, the soul can transcend the need for rebirth and achieve liberation. But for the vast majority, this recognition never comes. Pulled by attraction or pushed by aversion, the consciousness eventually surrenders to one of these visions. In the moment of conception, it enters the womb, forgetting everything about its previous existence and its journey through the Bardo. This forgetting is perhaps the most poignant aspect of the entire cycle. The soul that has just experienced the complete truth about itself, that has seen with perfect clarity the patterns keeping it bound to suffering, now forgets it all. It enters a new life with no conscious memory of what came before, doomed to repeat the same patterns, make the same mistakes, until it develops the awareness to break free. This is why the Tibetan tradition places such emphasis on developing awareness during life. The patterns that will determine the Bardo experience and the nature of the next rebirth are being created right now, in every moment, through every thought, word, and action. The time to prepare for death is not when it arrives, but throughout life, through the systematic training of consciousness. But if this knowledge is so crucial, why was it kept hidden for so long? Why were these teachings concealed from the general population, reserved only for those deemed ready to receive them? The answer reveals something profound about the nature of spiritual truth and the systems designed to control it. As the 49-day journey through the Bardo reaches its culmination, the soul faces its ultimate choice: liberation or rebirth. This is not a choice made through conscious deliberation, but through the accumulated momentum of countless lifetimes of habits, tendencies, and patterns. For the vast majority of souls, this choice is made unconsciously. Drawn by subtle attractions and repelled by aversions, the consciousness drifts toward one of the gateways that have appeared throughout the Bardo journey. Each gateway leads to a different realm of existence, a different possible rebirth based on the soul's karma. The Tibetan Book of the Dead describes in precise detail how this process unfolds. As the 49th day approaches, the soul begins to experience increasingly vivid visions of its potential future lives. It sees couples engaged in union, representing possible parents. It feels itself drawn toward particular environments, particular circumstances that resonate with its karmic patterns. For most, these visions trigger powerful reactions. The unprepared soul, still operating from habitual patterns of attraction and aversion, either reaches toward pleasant visions or turns away from frightening ones. Either reaction keeps the consciousness bound to the cycle, unable to recognize the true nature of what it is experiencing. This is the final and perhaps most subtle test of the Bardo journey. Can the soul recognize that even these compelling visions of future lives are projections of mind rather than external realities? Can it maintain awareness even as it is pulled toward rebirth? For the trained mind, for the consciousness that has prepared through meditation and spiritual practice, this recognition remains possible even at this late stage. By seeing through the illusions, by recognizing the empty nature of all appearances, the soul can still break free from the cycle altogether. The Tibetan text offers specific instructions for this critical moment. It advises the soul to avoid being attracted to visions of pleasure or repelled by visions of suffering. It provides visualizations and mantras designed to help the consciousness maintain awareness even as it is drawn toward rebirth. But these instructions are useful only if the soul remembers them, only if it has trained in them during life. For the unprepared, the visions are simply overwhelming, and the pull toward rebirth becomes impossible to resist. In the final moments of the Bardo, as the soul is drawn toward conception, it experiences what the text describes as a momentary clear light, a final opportunity for liberation before the cycle begins again. But this light is subtler than the clear light experienced at the moment of death, and even more difficult to recognize. For most, this final opportunity passes unnoticed. The consciousness, pulled by karmic winds, enters the womb at the moment of conception. In that instant, it forgets everything about its previous existence and its journey through the Bardo. The cycle begins anew. This is the pattern that has repeated countless times for each consciousness. Birth, life, death, Bardo, rebirth. An endless wheel of becoming, driven by ignorance and perpetuated by unconscious reactions to the illusions of existence. But the Tibetan Book of the Dead insists that this cycle is not inevitable. At every stage of the Bardo journey, opportunities for liberation exist. The key is awareness, the ability to recognize illusion as illusion, to see that everything experienced in the Bardo is a projection of mind rather than external reality. This awareness cannot be developed after death. It must be cultivated during life, through meditation, through spiritual practice, through the systematic training of consciousness. The time to prepare for the Bardo is not when death arrives, but throughout life, in every moment, through every thought, word, and action. This is why the ancient masters considered preparation for death the most important spiritual practice of all. They understood that the journey through the Bardo is not just about what happens after death, but about the culmination of an entire life. Every habit, every pattern, every tendency developed during life creates the conditions that will determine the Bardo experience and the nature of the next rebirth. The profound truth at the heart of these teachings is that death does not change who you are. It reveals who you are. The state of your mind at the moment of death, the patterns you have cultivated throughout life, will determine everything that follows. If you have lived unconsciously, reacting to experiences with habitual patterns of attraction and aversion, you will move through the bardo in exactly the same way. Unconscious, reactive, pulled by karma toward another rebirth. But if you have cultivated awareness, if you have trained your mind to recognize the true nature of reality, you will navigate the bardo with that same awareness, with the possibility of breaking free from the cycle altogether. This is why these teachings were considered so precious, so sacred, and in some contexts, so dangerous. They reveal that liberation is not granted by an external savior, but achieved through one's own awareness. They show that heaven and hell are not places, but states of consciousness created by the mind itself. They demonstrate that the key to freedom lies not in blind faith or obedience to authority, but in the cultivation of one's own wisdom mind. For over 1,000 years, these teachings were kept hidden, reserved only for those who had undergone years of preparation. They were transmitted orally from master to student, written in coded language accessible only to initiates, concealed from those deemed unready to receive them. But now, in our time, these teachings have emerged from secrecy. The Tibetan Book of the Dead has been translated into many languages, its profound insights available to anyone willing to engage with them. The question is no longer whether we can access this knowledge, but whether we will use it, whether we will take seriously the task of preparing for the journey that awaits us all. The ancient masters who preserved these teachings understood something that modern society has largely forgotten. Death is not the end of consciousness, but a transition, a doorway into another state of being. How we pass through that doorway, what we experience on the other side, and whether we achieve liberation or return for another cycle, all depend on the state of our mind, on the awareness we have cultivated during life. This is the final truth revealed by the Tibetan Book of the Dead. You will never actually die. Consciousness continues. The journey goes on. And with the right preparation, with the cultivation of awareness in this very life, you can transform that journey from an unconscious, wandering through endless cycles of rebirth into a conscious path toward ultimate liberation. The choice is yours. The time to prepare is now. The bardo awaits us all.